Hello guys and welcome to my new video, and today we'll be looking at Holy Paladin pre-patch 8.0 guide. We'll be looking at specific pre-patch talent builds, and we'll be looking at talent builds that you might be using when BfA rating comes in a couple of weeks time as well. So I'm going to try and cover both. There has been certain builds that have emerged in pre-patch that won't be available in BfA because you're able to use legendaries, and some of the legendaries work really well with certain talents. But first of all, let's look at the talent choices. And there's been some shift in terms of which talents are strongest, specifically with the auras and things like that. But let's look at tier 15. In tier 15, you basically have Crusader Smite and Bestowed Fate. Light's Hammer is somewhat situational, it's quite mana intensive, so you kind of have to be careful about this, but it does have certain uses. But a lot of people will either go with Bestowed Fate, which is basically a detonation type heal that you place on priority targets or a tank, or Crusader Smite, which basically means you should be in melee and you should be hitting the boss, and your Crusader Strike reduces the cooldown of Holy Shock and Light of Dawn. Now, this talent has direct synergy with a talent build that I'll be talking about later on, so keep that in mind. At tier 30, Rule of Law is just amazing, increases the range of your heals. To be completely honest, every time I play other healers, I kind of wish they would have that as well. Rule of Law is extremely good in nearly every situation, to be honest. At 45, keep in mind, this is a raiding guide, so all of these talents are mainly aimed at raiding scenarios. At 45, you have your CC talents. You can pick whichever you want depending on situation. This will always change based on a boss and things like that. At tier 60, now this is going to be a little bit different because Order of Sacrifice has been completely reworked. It's somewhat similar to Devotion Aura. It will, when you use your Aura Mastery, it'll provide 30% reduction to your whole raid, but the damage is going to come towards you. Now, not recommended in most case scenarios because of the weak passive. While you're above 75% health, 10% of the damage taken to your allies will, by your allies within 10 yards is redirected to you. It basically requires to stay at 75% HP most of the time, and it's kind of hard to do in a progression fight unless you have a lot of leech and things like that. So most of the people will tell you to go Devotion Aura. Devotion Aura is just a flat out 20% damage reduction when you use Aura Mastery, which is just amazing. Now, if you are doing pokes or if you worry about healing meters, you probably will go with Aura of Mercy because most of the top Holy Paladins who are ranking in logs will be using Aura of Mercy because it shows up on your meters. The fact is that Devotion Aura, the damage reduction that it provides, it's somewhat better. But if you want to look good on the meters, Aura of Mercy is probably the way to go. Now, it depends on which kind of player you are. Now, at 75, all of these talents are relatively viable and can be used in a raiding situation. It all is going to depend on what you need. My personal preference is probably Judgment of Light, which has been somewhat nerfed. Now, Judgment now causes the next 25 successful attacks against the target to heal the attacker for a specific amount. I like this because it gives me something else to do beside using the filler abilities, using Judgment on cooldown and things like that, or at least a way to keep track of the amount of stacks you have left on your Judgment. Is a good way to do it, especially with specific weak auras. So I usually go with Judgment of Light, but I'll be completely honest, any of these are viable in a raiding situation. Now, at tier 90, there's been a substantial shift made here because you get Avenging Crusader. Avenging Crusader is a new talent that requires you to melee the boss and use Crusader Strike and Judgment in order to heal your party members. So damage into healing, which can be, it's actually extremely fun to use, but of course, maybe you're not always in the melee, maybe the boss is away, there's no one to attack, so it might not always work. You can always swap into Sanctified Wrath, which, gives you a stronger Wings cooldown, which, doesn't require to melee the boss. Now, Awakening, I'll talk about this later on, but it generally is not that recommended, but I'll talk about a specific build that's emerging in the pre-patch. So keep in mind, Avenging Crusader will alter your stat weights, which I'll talk about later on as well. At tier 100, Beacons are just too strong. Beacon of Fate in a raiding environment is the way to go. It fits the meta of 2 tanks. Beacon of Virtue is the way to go in 5-man situations. They're still extremely strong. Now, I wanted to talk about a specific build that's happening in pre-patch right now, and it's going to be depending on legendaries. Now, for this build in BfA, you most likely will be going with something similar, or at least maybe I'll go with something similar like this. When BfA actually launches with my Bestowed Fate, Rule of Law, it doesn't matter here. Devotion Aura, probably Judgment of Light, Avenging Crusade or Sanctified Rite. I'm not sure about it, and Beacon of Fate. This is probably going to be my BfA rating talent selection. Now, this is a new talent build that's emerging in the pre-patch only. Crusader Smite, Rule of Law, it doesn't matter which one's here. Then you can, it doesn't matter, most of the people in pre-patch will be going with Aura of Mercy to look better on the meters. Judgment of Light here, and then you'll have Awakening, and you'll have Divine Purpose. You'll have Divine Purpose through the use of your class Legendary Ring, which gives you Divine Purpose. So you'll spec into Beacon of Fate, but you'll get Divine Purpose through the Legendary Ring, and all of a sudden you'll have this RNG build. Because you have to look at Divine Purpose, casting Light of Dawn, or Holy Shock has 20% chance not to trigger the cooldown. Awakening, Light of Dawn has a 15% chance to grant you Avenging Wrath. Crusader Strike reduces the cooldown of your Holy Shock and Light of Dawn. So now you have this synergy between all these three talents here that kind of allow you to get this RNG buff that's, you know, depending which buff you get. Again, this build is emerging, and I mean, I can see its uses on the constant AoE fights and things like that, but it's very random. You can't control it. You don't know when it's going to activate. My personal preference is to go with something that's controlled, something like Sanctified Wrath, Avenging Crusader, but that's me. So it all depends on what kind of player you are, and there are players who are using this random build at the moment. Now let's look at stat priority, and stat priority is somewhat changing for Holy Paladins. There's a lot more to concentrate as a Holy Paladin if you want to optimize your stats. Now, first of all, Int is going to become much stronger than it was before. That's happening to basically every single class and spec in BfA. They want to make priority or your primary stat be way stronger. Crit Strike is still going to be very up. Critical Strike is going to be your best secondary stat, and after that, it all depends. Avenging Crusader does not work, or the heals from your Judgment and Crusader Strike when spec'd into Avenging Crusader does not work with Mastery, meaning that this cooldown is not utilized by Mastery at all. Meaning that if you do spec in Avenging Crusader, your Mastery is gonna drop to like the lowest priority. You don't want that much Mastery at all. So all of a sudden, if you're speccing into this talent, you kind of want to have a gear set that's, you know, gonna have enough crit, and it's not gonna have that much Mastery. And then if you don't spec into it, you kind of get back to the same kind of stat priority that you had in Legion, you know, well, relatively. But in BfA, you know, Int is going to be very strong, crit is going to be your best secondary stat. After that, you kind of have, like, you know, Mastery is great if you can actually be stacked up in like melee or range groups and there's enough people around you. Mastery can be really strong. If you're kind of separated from the group, which is not really recommended as a Holy Paladin, Mastery is not going to be that great. Versatility is a good pick. It just gives you that flat out healing and damage reduction, which can be really strong. Haste can be okay as well. It really depends on how much. It's really dependent on whether you're going to run out of mana. It's really dependent on which filler spells you use, like Flash of Light or Holy Light and things like that. So it's kind of like, you know, Int, crit, then like Mastery, versatility or whatever, depending on whether you're stacked or not, and then you kind of have haste there, but haste can change as well. So you have to keep that in mind. Avenging Crusader will drop your Mastery to the lowest. So when BfA hits, I kind of recommend people to have these two different gear sets available for certain fights where you're like, okay, I can melee that boss all day long, and I'm going to be using Avenging Crusader, so all of a sudden you kind of be taking away that Mastery away. So let's look at the gameplay, and the gameplay for Holy Paladins is still kind of the same. You want to use your Holy Shock and Light of Dawn almost on cooldown. I mean, Light of Dawn is your only AoE ability right now, and it's kind of like a smart heal to some extent, and you know, it's relatively inexpensive. You want to use it when people are taking damage. Of course, Holy Shock will give you Infusion of Light proc. It's not guaranteed anymore because Holy Shock baseline crit has been reduced to 30% instead of doubling your crit. So you won't get that many Infusion of Light procs. Right now in pre-patch, you're probably running, I don't know, with 40 to 50% crit. So you get 30% on top of that because Holy Shock gives you 30% baseline crit. So you're gonna get Infusion of Light relatively often. In BfA, your secondary stats are gonna plummet. They're gonna plummet to some extent, maybe single digits. So all the sudden Infusion of Light procs are going to be really hard to get. And Infusion of Light procs, what do? They reduce the casting time of your Holy Light. They make your Holy Light faster, or they make your Flash of Light way stronger. So it's the kind of buff that you always want to have, but it's very random at the same time. Again, Holy Shock, Light of Dawn all the time. Judgment, if you have the specific talents, Judgment of Light, you want to use that on cooldown as well, or at least make sure that you don't overwrite the stacks, or you maintain stacks on multiple ads and things like that. It can be something to do when you don't have anything to do. And then after that, you have this kind of deal of, do I use Holy Light? Holy Light is very efficient heal. You can use it as your filler spell. It's not going to save people's lives when someone is really low. If someone's really low, you want to use that Flash of Light. Preferably if you have that Infusion of Light proc, your Flash of Light is going to save someone's life. Now, I also mentioned that you'll most likely be using in raiding scenario Beacon of Fate. You need to make sure to maintain your Beacon of Fate on your tanks. And again, the whole perception of a tank healer for Holy Paladin, most of your healing will be done on raid members, and your tanks will be supplemented by a beacon healing. Now the fact is that in BfA, tank healing is relatively hard. There's a lot of damage happening to tanks. You also have to rely on other healers to maintain some of that healing on the tanks as well. It's preferable that the Holy Paladin will be casting or healing the raid, and the beacons will be doing majority of the tank healing, but that's not always going to happen. If your tank is about to die, you want to go and heal that tank. If you heal a tank who has your beacons on them, you get reduction, or your spells will cost less mana if you're healing the beacon. So you get some kind of incentive to heal the beacon targets, but it's not worth in terms of HPS. But of course, if you let the tank die, the raid wipes. So this is basically the gameplay. And then after that, you have kind of like a cooldown usage, and the cooldown usage is not that much anymore, guys. Like, I mean, you don't have Tears Deliverance, you have wings. If you spec into Avenging Crusader, it's going to replace your wings. Like I mentioned, if you don't spec into Holy Avenger, you won't have it. So you won't have another cooldown. So you don't have that much cooldowns anymore. And that's one of the reasons why I said that Holy Paladin healing is becoming relatively more simple. It's more simple right now. It's easier to manage your cooldowns. Your Aura of Sacrifice, or the aura that you're going to pick, which probably should be Devotion Aura in most cases anyways, if you don't look to top those meters, doesn't require much thought. You press it and you just go about your business as usual. You'll still be Holy Shocking, Light of Dawning, using your filler spells, maintaining your judgment and things like that. So if you think about it, it's not really that bad. In terms of gear, I mentioned this before, I kind of covered this with the pre-patch build. With this pre-patch build that I mentioned before, the one that I called the random build, you'll be probably using the class ring. If you use the class ring, you'll notice you get Divine Purpose, and this is the random build that's available on the pre-patch right now. I mean, I probably won't recommend this because it's not, well, you can try it out in pre-patch, have fun with it. It's not going to be available in BfA because you can't have the class ring, and beacons is just too strong in raid environments, and you probably never want to lose out on Beacon of Fate anyways. But on top of that, you have your Priadus. Priadus is still extremely strong. You also have your Silver Moon Ring, which is, again, a lot of people are using Silver Moon Ring as well. So if you're using the Silver Moon Ring, you want to make sure you judge or use judgment on cooldown and things like that. Things like Balance are strong. They're pretty good legendaries right now. You can try out the random build and see how it goes. When BfA hits, you won't be able to do that. You want to maintain those beacons as well. Overall, this has been a very simple overview of Holy Paladin healing. Not much has changed in terms of healing. The same kind of gameplay is there. Talents has changed. Stat priority is the biggest thing to happen right now, with Avenging Crusader dictating the stats that you're going to be stacking, or the stats that you want in BfA. Thank you guys for watching this guide, and I'll see you in my next video.